the uniqueness of what you're about to see.
And we might also point out that none of the injuries sustained in these crashes were life-threatening. And besides that, these are crashes that have not necessarily occurred in 1987, but rather a compilation of crashes that have occurred over the past few years. So let us hit the videotape machine and take a look at our first segment here of Thrills and Spills. And we start off with some Mickey Thompson racing.
Well, Bob, Mickey Thompson Racing is a highlights package in itself, and these, of course, are their sport trucks, and they provide a lot of thrills.
Now watch these guys go over the jump at the same time. Only one survived.
And he was the winner. Oh, as you can see on a Mickey Thompson, you don't drive a Mickey Thompson vehicle, you attempt to ride it out.
We've got Odysseys and quads and bikes and four-wheelers and everything, and nobody is safe in Mickey Thompson Racing.
Now, all of these vehicles start out on four wheels. Many of them don't end up that way.
The crowd loves it, though. This guy won the race. This happened after he went over the final jump, taking the checkered flag on the seat of his pants.
Here's a man who was told to put his nose down to the grindstone of his work. He did, literally.
Over the jumps.
Now his impersonation of Pearl Harbor bombs away.
What a terrific impact these guys take. Back to the bikes once again. Oh! Into the hay bales. The bike goes flying off, but the rider survives. Nice hit to the nose on that particular...
I think that probably really needs no explanation.
Into the wall. Three others pile into him. There is one of the hardest hits that I've ever seen a rider sustain.
Here are the small Odysseys. They're difficult to keep upright when you're on a flat surface, let alone a Mickey Thompson jump.
Dirt tracking around the corners and up and over.
Complete somersault.
Yeah, he probably kept going.
There is Danny Thompson, the son of race promoter Mickey Thompson, and here's proof that all the flying is not done indoors, that there is some flying outdoors also.
That was at Riverside. Now we go back inside and little rear end activity there.
You thought only animals were the kind of vehicles that do the right. And here's a guy who can't decide where he wants to race. On the track, on the wall. No, back on the track. I'll get back into the race.
But he manages to keep going.
Odysseys are tough to keep upright on a flat surface, let alone a Mickey Thompson jump.
Double flip coming up here. One over, and there's a second one over on his side.
There's an ultra stock attempting to ride on his side like a daredevil high rider, but is unsuccessful in doing so.
Now, this is a good example of where the advertiser should put his name on the bottoms of these cars, on the underpants.
There's no question about it. A checkered flag, a race that you survive, not win.
But the crashes aren't over yet. Up and over.
Mickey Thompson Stadium Racing, I think, is an example of the Gary Hart approach to motorsports, Bob. No matter how wildly these guys flip out, they come back in the race again.
And Roger Mears with our final rollover of that segment.
And Bob, if you liked what you saw, I got a taste of it there. They will be on ESPN for 8 races this coming season, 1988.
And we will be back with more Thrills and Spills from ESPN right after this.
In motor racing, it is very expensive. We don't want to lose sight of that fact. But what about this?
Here's Mario Andretti's crash at Milwaukee, a race we televised live here on ESPN. Indy cars hitting the outside barrier, sliding across the track, and into the inside barrier.
This was a couple years ago at San Air Superspeedway. Superspeedway just about 7/8 of a mile in length, and Jacques Villeneuve takes out Bobby Rahal.
Danny Ungais in a terrible crash at Indianapolis. Again, no life-threatening injuries. Herm Johnson.
And spinning right in front of Arie Luyendyk, Randy Lanier.
Pancho Carter, this crash will forever be remembered. He slid several yards on the roll bar, but Pancho walked away from it. That's Jim Crawford in a crash also at Indianapolis.
Tom Sneva in one of a couple that he had in 1987. And there is Michael Andretti really putting Danny Sullivan through his test.
That was at Portland. Here's Portland also. That's Roberto Guerrero in the white number 2. Almost launching himself, but the car comes back on its wheels.
Difficult to tell exactly which was the proper direction for Arie Luyendyk to be heading in that particular case.
Gordon John Cock at Phoenix a couple of years ago. Several others involved in that crash. On the high banks of Michigan International Speedway.
To the not-so-high banks at Pocono.
Here's a crash at Phoenix.
Jose Lee Garza spinning right in front of then leader Kevin Kogan. And there is a terrific lift absorbed by Jacques Villeneuve.
Scott Brayton, also at Indianapolis. Here comes Michael Andretti through the pits at Pocono. Only 3 wheels. Great shot here of Tom Sneva at Miami. Heads first into the tire barrier.
And, Bob, this is the moment that Al Unser Sr. got into this year's Indianapolis 500-mile race when Danny Ongais crashed at probably 190 miles an hour in practice.
And it put him in the hospital and put Al Unser in that seat that eventually took him to the checkered flag at Indianapolis. Back again with more of Thrills and Spills here on ESPN. Stay with us. Spills and Thrills here on ESPN. Some crashes from the past 2 seasons. No injuries, no major injuries in any of these crashes. Now we go to the stock cars. This is Phil Barkdahl at Daytona.
This is Gary Newfer in an ARCA race also down at Daytona. And what is making stock car crashes so spectacular these days, Jeff Bodine, Richard Petty, Alan Kawicki pullbacking through, is that the cars sail nowadays because of the speed.
As evidenced by Bobby Allison in that awesome crash at Talladega. Here's Allison again in trouble, hitting the outside wall. And this is from an ARCA race in which numerous, shall we say, cars are involved.
Kind of like a presidential nomination race, isn't it? You can't tell which leader is up front.
Jeff Bodine spinning off the banking once again at Bristol International Raceway.
Now, who do you suppose in 1987, yep, would beat a tire that's loose and errant? Harry Gant. This was a wreck here that caused a great deal of consternation and a lot of problems for television commentators. You make the call.
And a slow-mo of it as Sterling Marlin is nudged by Dale Earnhardt.
Young, teenage Robbie Moroso gained some age in this particular incident.
That was at Bristol also, and then he is T-boned by another car. Now we go in-car for some action.
It looks smooth right now, but keep your eye on Ricky Rudd. He gets through the first incident, okay, the first errant car, but he can't avoid Terry Labonte.
At Daytona once again. This is Brett Hearn, the modified driver from the Northeast.
Wishing he was still on dirt. Although Brent gets out of this reasonably unscathed, considering what can happen, there's Murph Treichler meeting with the cement.
Head on almost into the concrete. And Ken Schrader. Here's Derek Cope with a hard hit on the inside.
And those hurt, believe me, the ones that are from the rear, you can't see quite as well as what's coming up front.
Short track crashes are really neat because, as you can see, sometimes the entire track gets blocked.
Now, keep your eyes closely on this car. The fuel cell is going to play a role in this incident. No serious injuries. Now, here is Jeff Bodine having a discussion with a Richard Petty crewman. They are no doubt discussing each other's heritage. The Petty crewman disagrees and says, no, I think that your family came from another locale. And finally, Dale Inman, the longtime associate and cousin of Richard Petty, moves in as the peacemaker, draws peace, and Jeff Bodine walks away.
You know, Larry, in-car cameras came along several years ago, and they provided some excellent shots. Here's Cale Yarborough moving through the Bobby Allison crash at Talladega, spinning completely around. It eliminated him, by the way, from this race.
He got blasted from behind. You saw Greg Sachs sitting sideways in front of Cale for just a few seconds. This is Atlanta, late 1987. Ed Pym spinning directly in front of Cale Yarborough, who was running well in the race. He had a chance to win. Lake Speed also gets involved. Cale's car erupted in flames as he headed back toward the pits. For a few anxious moments, we were all very concerned about his health and well-being, but he did escape this.
Now, this is the Bob Wallach crash at Sears Point, I believe. The in-car camera will go to black as impact is made, but there is the tail end of the crash, and look at the damage sustained by that car. We're in Rick Wilson's car now. He's going to have contact with Richard Petty, who gets sideways right in front of him.
This was that same incident that Jeff Bodine and Richard Petty's crewman had the discussion on a little earlier in this show.
Now, Kenny Schrader sees trouble up ahead. He signals to the drivers behind him. He manages to drive through the crash and unscathed. And here's how it looked from outside.
Watch for Schrader going right through the middle. There's Rudd. Here comes Schrader. He threads the needle between Waltrip and Bodine and gets through.
Sometimes you call it right and sometimes you don't. But Ken Schrader made the right decision there as everybody else piled up in front of it.
Bob, perhaps in this segment you saw the hardest hit of 1987. A.J. Foyt, unsolicited, saw this tape. He saw Wallach hit, said that was a difficult one. Bob, wherever we travel, that's almost inevitably the first thing out of anybody's mouth. And even in England this summer, they talk about the short track open wheelers in America and all the thrills that they provide.
And the Speedrome in Indianapolis provided some outstanding moments. This is Ken Nichols' crash down into turn number 1. Now another angle. This is photographer Greg Oldham's shot. Look how close the car comes to our photographer, but he stays right in there, and Ken Nichols also not injured.
Now, here's a situation where obviously discretion becomes the better part of valor when one driver finds that the other driver is larger than size once it's appearing into the cockpit. Obviously, Ascot Park in suburban Los Angeles, California, Gardena to be exact.
Relatively gentle rollover. Not this, though. This is at Syracuse, New York, during the modified race. And another really hard hit coming up right here in turn number 1. A car that helplessly is nailed head-on by another.
No serious injuries in that crash, incredibly. The high-bank half-mile Eldora Speedway in Ohio. A 1946 Curtis Midget perhaps sees its, well, maybe one of its final races. This is the Williams Grove Speedway in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. Hey, that's not a sprint car, is it?
Well, it almost looks like it. This is a dragster, of course, going over the wall upside down.
Hank Ender's IHRA drag racing activity.
Back to the Speedrome. That's Christine Green going out of the ballpark.
Yes, Christine as in lady. Now, this was no lady, but look at the high-flying Dwayne Paduska at Ascot.
He had to set some kind of a record for height in that particular flip.
And this is a sequence of typical rollovers for the non-winged sprint cars. Who says you have to have wings to fly?
Here's a wing sprint flying down the main stretch, however, and somebody else getting in trouble on the outside. Massive pile up here. A couple of them roll over.
Certainly sprint cars are among the most topsy-turvy race cars that you'll find anywhere in the world. And as we mentioned at the top of this segment, everybody from coast to coast and from country to country talks about the short track open wheelers in America.
Back to Ascot, and this guy saves it.
And here is one of the most severe rollovers by a full-body modified race car of the most recent season.
This is Tom Bigelow at Tampa Fairgrounds a few years ago, getting all tangled up in the catch fence, no injury. And that is also at Tampa with a sprint car going out of the ballpark. I believe that is Rick Fogley.
And there are some days when nothing goes right. Even a push truck is volatile.
And the crashes aren't limited to the United States. That was in New Zealand.
Ron Sleepy Tripp, that is just Terre Haute, Indiana. That's, of course, in America.
Even indoors, they have crashes. Back to the Speedrome once again, another flip. That's Ken Nichols again, this time flipping to the inside.
And here's the solution to, when you crash, load up automatically. You don't have to take care of it later on.
An awesome fire at the Little 500. That's Robert Smith from the Florida area, involved in flames. He manages to get out of the car, however, with no major injuries. Another pretty good height achieved on this sprinter down the back stretch at Ascot.
Now, keep your eyes peeled closely on the fuel spilled on the front stretch. Exhaust ignites.
Super modified.
There's a record set for the number of pirouettes conducted in midair. This, believe it or not, was a full-bodied stock car in the Northeast. That was Beaver Dragon. I've never seen a late model flip as many times as he did.
I know, it was really awesome. He just flipped completely down the main straightaway.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll be back with more.
Racing San Diego Charger fashion. That is to say, things started out just great this year. It kept getting worse and worse and worse. And, Bob, coming up is what I believe to be the crash of the decade so far in IMSA. And repeating again, nobody was injured in this crash. There is Chip Robinson sailing high. Lynn St. James is flipping into mid-ground. She is the one who erupts in the flames. That's Doc Bundy sitting along the wall. No injuries. Just incredible.
Here's Elliot Forbes Robinson cutting a tire, slamming against the concrete, and EFR did suffer a shoulder injury in this crash.
Talk about the expensive crashes, those IMSA crashes. Now, here's a case of what happens when a car attempts to turn right.
Yeah.
That is 90 degrees in the middle of a straightaway.
A little prematurely, you're right. And another example of that after contact with a car.
They just won't learn. You don't turn to the right, particularly heading into a left-hand.
Those are really hard hits.
Watkins Glen, of course.
And back to the speedrome. Here's Ron Dink Glidden flipping into the first turn.
Don't roll down the bank on a high bank. When you're there, stay on the brakes until everybody gets by.
More rollovers in midgets at the Indianapolis Speedrome. Ooh. I think this guy's a little angry at somebody or at himself.
Watch this. There's a sudden stop. They didn't have that pole built there a year ago when I went off there. I thought I could use that groove.
And he did a little wire knocking down, too, a little arcing there. Phoenix International Raceway again, the late models. And some Riverside action
He
now.
saved it? No, he lost it.
Yeah.
Well,
Now
no,
there
he
he
saved
saved
it.
it. No.
Well, he lost it. No, he saved it. He just can't make his mind up.
Can you believe doing this? I mean...
That old ABC saying, the agony of defeat. Ugh.
That hurts. What's this guy?
I never did understand why motorcycle racers weren't women instead of men.
Watch this guy go between two bikes. Perfect timing. Oh.
Couldn't do that if he planned it. Wouldn't want to do that even if he planned on it.
Watch this guy go head on into the front stretch wall. Boom! And then another guy comes along and hits the front stretch wall head on. More action in the sprint cars. Some modified action. Watch this. Woo.
When Ronnie Burke spent the weekend in Houston racing, he told all of his friends, I was on a roll. I think he misled them.
That had to be one of the most spectacular crashes I've ever seen. That thing must have turned over 20 times on its way down the back strip.
There's Bobby Rahal helping out one of the Camel Lights cars to maneuver the downtown street course in Columbus, Ohio. Here's Robin Dallenbach. She makes the pass, but I think she overcooked it just a bit in the kitchen.
Just a little bit.
Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. Certain stages of the GPO season, there was a lot of that.
This is North Wilkesboro in the modified race we televise every year. Back to the Eldora High Bank. And some activity from Bristol International Raceway. That's Mark Martin sliding up against the wall.
Whose tires leave green smoke. Certainly unique.
Bob Wallach, unable to turn, sliding into the tire barrier. This is Steve Reynolds, who did receive some injuries in that crash. As a matter of fact, he was unconscious for several days, however, is now perfectly fine. Chip Robinson crashing. Now some drag racing action.
Run is over. Run is complete. Successful run, yes? No.
The engine flipping down the far end of the race course. Close call there as the guy spun and then pulled right up in front of somebody. That's Neil Bonnet.
Proving once again the wall remains undefeated. This is super modified action from Oswego, New York. Because the track is so large, the cars don't appear to be going that fast, but this is one of the fastest short tracks anywhere in America. He had asked for a push back to the race car, back to the pits, but I don't think that's exactly what he had in mind.
The American Racing Series in the Meadowlands.
There's Tommy Byrne dive bombing Steve Millen, raring to go a sprint car.
This is how to separate a passenger car. More action from the Blackwater Scramble. Blackwater, an appropriate name for this event, by the way.
Certainly get the idea, don't you?
Now the super modifieds at Phoenix.
The program has also been a tribute, really, to crews everywhere, because even though you are physically assembling a race car right now, you're always mentally working on the next car, because you know that this one, sooner or later, is going to be destroyed.
And I think it also speaks well for the safety regulations that are built into race cars.
Safest in the history of the sport.
That's right. Larry and I thank you for joining us for Thrills and Spills. For now, so long.